Tết rồng, khỏe như rồng. Đến ngay nhà thuốc FPT Long Châu.
嗨，大家好，我是何军。
I have created a 3D printer that can print metal at home for just $100 bucks. With it, I've already made motors, jets, and multi-layer PCBs. And all of that is just a glimpse of what's possible with this printer. In comparison, if you want to buy a machine that can make the same types of parts today, it will cost you at least $500,000. And yet, the $100 price tag of my homemade solution isn't even the most significant thing about it.
But before I tell you what that is, we need to know how it works, and more importantly, how it's made.
For that, I need to tell you about electroplating, a process that dissolves a piece of metal in fluid with the help of electricity, and then deposits that same metal on the other side of the electrical circuit, where it can create a solid metal layer. Until now, if you would have wanted to electroplate a part with this process, you would have needed to fully submerge the part in electrolyte. The problem with this is that the metal particles can kind of go wherever they want to in the electrolyte, and because of that, it's very difficult to get an even coating across the whole part. So when you try to make a thick metal coating, you end up having entire regions of your part uncoated, while other parts look like this. Ew.
But don't worry, at this point I had the idea that will make you go,
Damn it, why didn't I think of that?
If we only submerge a little bit of our part in the fluid, then we have only given the metal one place to go, and thereby we know exactly how much metal we have deposited exactly where. Then we just repeat this process and go around the part in small segments to ensure a nice even coating.
And I designed a 3D printer that does exactly that.
With the help of surface tension, it can create these electrolyte bubbles wherever we want. And by combining this system with a traditional 3D printer and some conductive filament, we can first print, then deposit metal onto that, and then print on top of that again and repeat the cycle as many times as we want with no human interaction. Right away, this lets us make multi-layered printed circuit boards at home. But why stop there? I have already made motors and even ionic thrusters with this system. Just look at this printer that uses a fully 3D printed ionic thruster as a part schooling. Move around and deposit these electrolyte bubbles. It works by replacing the silicon. And as a cherry on top, you can even have your part in this version. And this one that has a parameter where metal is placed, we submerge the whole. For now, it works, but I'm sure that the community will find solutions that work a lot better than what I could come up with.
And if you want to contribute or just join the conversation, there's a Discord link in the video description. People there have already made great progress on the printer that I introduced in my last video.
Start today with GoDaddy. If you can dream it, you can build it. Whatever your idea.
I want to build a hand crank generator that can be used to produce electricity anywhere. To generate electricity. This works by spinning two plates of magnets either side of is far too low for our own alternator. I've got two plates of magnets either side of some copper coils. Each magnet is mounted with alternating poles, so one has its north pole facing the camera and the next has its south pole facing the camera. So when placing a coil next to the magnets and spinning them, the magnetic field changes, creating a current within the coil, and because of the alternating magnet poles, this magnet will produce a current in this direction, and the other magnet will produce it in the opposite direction, and the direction of the current flow will alternate as the magnets spin. So let's replicate this alternator design with some small modifications to make it suitable for a hand crank generator. I started by printing the plate that will hold the magnets, or otherwise known as the rotor, as it rotates within the alternator. This was simply printed from PLA plastic, as it's cheap, non-conductive, and doesn't affect the magnetic fields. Then I bought some high quality N52 grade magnets that simply press fit into the rotor, making sure the polarity of each magnet alternates around the circumference. I then printed a housing that will hold the rotor, as well as a shaft that is keyed, which will be important later. Then I printed the mount for the stator, or the stationary portion of the alternator, which will eventually hold the coils in position. And finally, on top of that, I can mount the second rotor, which is also keyed, to keep it spinning at the same rate as the first rotor on the other side. Now I need to make the coils that will be sandwiched between the two. At first, I used this 0.8mm enamelled copper wire, but it didn't allow many turns of wire, resulting in a low output voltage. The number of turns of wire in the coil is very important, as generally more turns of wire means a higher output voltage. So I rewound the coils with much thinner wire so that I could get more turns, which should increase the voltage. Another factor that affects the output voltage is the speed at which the magnets pass the coils. So I 3D printed a gear ratio that will allow me to spin the rotors faster, which increases the voltage significantly. The final method to increasing the output voltage is to connect the coils in series. Similar to connecting two batteries in series will double the voltage. This works the same with the coils. So I wound 7 more coils, each with 350 turns of wire, making a total of 8 coils and 2,800 turns of wire, which were all glued to the central stator and soldered together in a configuration of 2 in series and 4 in parallel, which, as I just mentioned, the number of coils in series affects the output voltage, and the number of coils in parallel affects the current capabilities. So 2 in series should produce about 15 to 20 volts, and 4 in parallel should be able to handle the current produced by my manual arm strength. The coil connects it back to the coil, completing the circuit. But if the coil creates current in the anti-clockwise direction, it will flow through this wire to the rectifier, down through this diode, over to the LED, back towards the top of the rectifier, and down through the diode to complete the circuit. So no matter the current direction in the coil, the current direction at the LED, or the output, is always the same. And I also added a few small capacitors to try create a smoother output voltage. So with a small voltmeter connected to the output of the rectifier, we can see the generated electricity when the handle is spun. Though this is only with one rotor spinning, and by attaching the second rotor, we can greatly increase the magnetic field within the coils, essentially doubling the output voltage. I then glued an XT60 connector to the frame of the generator, which will be used to output the generated power, and attached the other half of the frame to cover up the electronics. And finally, I added a handle to the crank, and there we have it, a 3D printed hand crank generator. So how well does it work? So to test how well the generator works, I made this small cable which has an XT60 connector to plug into the generator, and then just has some crocodile clips on the other end so we can see if it will power any various electronic items. Unfortunately, I don't have any 12 volt LEDs or light bulbs, but this voltmeter lights up just by turning it, which is essentially an LED in itself. But what I do have is the brushed electric motor that I showed earlier in the video. So let's see if this runs through hand power alone. So we'll just connect the crocodile clips onto there and then spin the generator. Well, that's working. It's quite impressive how much more resistance it adds to the generator. I can't really hold this whilst I turn it. Yeah, it's quite a lot of resistance to turn that. And if I spin the generator even faster, see if it goes higher RPM. That actually works really well, so it must be generating quite a lot of power. It definitely increases the resistance a lot. Let's see what else we can power. I've got a bank of supercapacitors, which were from my supercapacitor dragster a few years ago. I haven't actually used them in a while, so I don't know whether they have any charge. So if I plug these in like that, and then it'd be nice to have a bit of a longer wire, but that's going to have to do. Move those out of the way, and then we'll wind this up. I assume the voltage, the voltmeter on the top here doesn't show anything at the moment, because I assume it needs a minimum voltage to actually show something. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do, is I'll use my multimeter. Right, there we go. I've got the voltmeter connected up to the capacitors now, so you can see what they're at. So 1.3 volts at the moment. And if I turn this, it's charging up quicker than I thought it would do. 2 volts. I don't know when the LED voltmeter starts turning on. Oh, the LED voltmeter's turning on now, so it's saying 2.8 volts. Slightly different to the multimeter, but it's not bad. I think these are 3 volt capacitors, and I think it's 6 in series, so that's 18 volts. So I guess we can charge this up for a little bit. It's charging up surprisingly fast, actually. Let's see if I turn it slow, see if it still generates. Yeah, so if I turn it slow, it just generates a bit slow, and if I really crank it, then we get more volts. Okay, I don't really know what to do with that voltage now. I guess we could power the motor. All right, connecting the crocodile clip to the motor. Oh. Wow. That's quite a lot of energy stored just from cranking this thing around for probably not even more than a minute, really. Didn't take long at all to get up to 5 volts. Okay, moving on from the capacitors. I have this small, well, actually it's quite large. I have this 5 volt regulator which outputs USB power. See if I can charge my phone with this thing. I think compared to charging the capacitors and the motor, charging the phone will be very easy. So let's give that a go. So I haven't actually made a cable for charging my phone directly from this. So I'm just going to use a crocodile clip cable, which I guess I can clip onto the bottom of this board. It's not the most ideal solution because it could short out. USB plug in the other end, USB-C. Then I can plug my phone in the other end. Hopefully this doesn't kill my phone. How should I prop this up? Maybe I lean it down and use this big coil of wire. So I need to produce a minimum of 5 volts for it to charge, and it's charging. It says 1 hour 13 minutes to charge from 45%. If I stop, yeah, it detects USB disconnected. If I turn it again, charging. There's far less resistance charging my phone because I think this thing is only 5 volts 1 amp, so that's only 5 watts total, whereas when we're charging the supercapacitors or powering the motor, it's probably 10 to 20 watts or so, so it's much more difficult to turn. But this thing, I'm not sure I could crank this for 1 hour and 13 minutes to get my phone to full, but it works. It's not bad. So if any of you want to build your own hand crank generator for charging your phone or powering anything else, the 3D printer files for this are freely available via the link in the description below, which will go to printables, and all of the information about the bearing sizes, the bolt sizes, the magnet sizes, all the coil wire diameters, etc. Will also be mentioned on the printables description. So let me know if you build your own hand crank generator, and click subscribe and a thumbs up if you like the project. Goodbye.
Nhà nhà bật nắp lót 7up để thêm rộn ràng ngày Tết.
Watching something spin with very little friction can be quite satisfying, and this small spinning top can spin for over 5 minutes with just one spin by hand. But if we were to increase the weight of the spinning top, it should spin for a lot longer. The only problem with increasing the weight of the spinning top is it will also increase the friction at the contact point between the spinning top and the surface below. So how about we try and make a magnetically levitated flywheel? Permanent magnets have two poles, which are usually labelled north and south, and when a north pole is positioned close to a south pole, they are both attracted together. But when the magnets are arranged with matching poles near one another, the magnets are pushed apart, and it's this force that we can use to levitate the flywheel. To support the magnets, a frame can be built using these aluminium extrusions, as they're easily attached together with small brackets, almost like a Meccano kit. I can then mount the magnets to these brackets and bolt them down to the frame. For the magnets to levitate an axle, the magnets must be arranged with opposing poles like I mentioned earlier. But if you've ever tried to levitate a magnet on top of another, you'll know it's pretty much impossible to balance. That's because if the levitating magnet is offset by the smallest amount, not only do the repelling poles want to push it further to the left, but these two opposing poles are now pulling each other together, and will continue to do so until they both collide. However, if we give the shaft a small bias towards the left, we can constrain it with a smooth plate to prevent it travelling any further. This essentially turns the axle into a horizontal spinning top, where the magnets take the full weight of the flywheel, and there is very little friction created on the left, as if it were a small lightweight spinning top. Now this method of levitation was heavily inspired by this small toy that I bought off Amazon, where there's basically a shaft through the centre and two sets of magnets. Then the whole shaft is constrained by this small glass plate on the side here. But if I were to remove this glass plate, like so, and then try and balance it, it just falls straight down, depending on which direction I hold it. So if I hold it slightly to the left, and if I hold it slightly to the right, so you have to have this little constraining thing, which is very little friction, but just keeps it levitating. Nice and simple. The flywheel can then be machined out of aluminium for two reasons. The first being it's easier to machine than steel on my granddad's lathe. And the second and probably most important reason is the aluminium isn't magnetic, which could cause some issues with the levitation. And even being aluminium, it still weighs about 1.4 kilograms, which should have plenty of inertia. And there we have it, a magnetically levitated flywheel. Now, you may notice it's quite wobbly, which is due to a number of reasons. I initially built this with a threaded shaft as an axle to allow for adjustable positions of the magnets and flywheel, but after buying a bunch of these, they all seem to be slightly bent. So I then bought some steel shafts, which initially seemed to be a lot straighter. But long story short, I had to heat up the flywheel to fit the shaft through the centre hole, then ended up bending the shaft by accident, and now I can't get the flywheel off of the shaft. But I've now balanced it the best I can with some taped on washers, and it will happily sit there spinning for about 12 minutes. But I have an idea that will make this setup far more interesting. What if we could somehow extract the energy from the flywheel to power something? Because of the magnetic levitation, I want to be able to extract energy from the flywheel without making physical contact with it. So we need a method of transferring energy through magnetic induction. If we hold a magnet near a wire, nothing will happen. But if we spin the magnet, the changing magnetic field will induce a small current in the wire due to Faraday's law of induction. And this is the basis on how a generator works. Unfortunately, we can't use the spinning magnets from the levitation because their poles run axially along the shaft, so the magnetic field doesn't change as they spin. So I started building a rotor that will mount to the same axle as the flywheel and will hold a bunch of magnets which were all orientated with opposing poles facing up. This meant that one magnet would have its north pole facing up, and the magnet next to it would have its south pole facing up, and so on. Then to generate electricity from this, I can wind a lot of wire into a coil, and as the magnetic field changes, a current is induced in the coil. So let's say this magnet induces a current in the upwards direction, then the magnet next to it would induce a current in the downwards direction, because of their opposite pole orientation. This completes the clockwise current direction in the coil, and the direction of current flow will alternate as the motor spins, creating alternating current, or AC. Therefore, we have created an alternator. There's just one issue. The distance between the magnets and the coil affects the efficiency of the alternator due to the magnetic field being weaker as the distance between the two is increased. This isn't a huge issue in conventional alternators, as they can run the magnets really close to the coils due to tight tolerance bearings. However, this magnetically levitated axle isn't exactly precise and could run the risk of the magnets colliding with the coils. So to overcome this efficiency loss due to the large safety gap between the magnets and the coil, we can add a second rotor of magnets on the other side of the coil. This extends the magnetic field to look something like this and greatly increases the strength of the magnetic field in the coils, allowing for plenty of space for the shaft to wobble about. I then started winding wire around a 3D printed template to create the coil of the alternator, but we also need something to turn the alternating current into direct current if we want to power something like a light bulb or an electric motor. To convert the AC to DC, we need to use some diodes, which are essentially one-way valves for electricity. Current can flow through this direction no problem, but isn't able to flow back through the other way. And if we arrange 4 diodes in a formation like this, we've built what's known as a full bridge rectifier. The way this works is all the diodes are orientated in a way that the current can only flow in the downwards direction. So if we connect the alternator coil to these points on the rectifier and apply a current in the clockwise direction, the current has no choice but to flow down through this diode. And in reverse, it has no other choice but to flow down through this diode. This means if we connect a DC component like an LED to the top and bottom of the rectifier, as the coil creates a clockwise current, it will flow always in the same direction. We're getting some voltage. I think it's just charging up the capacitor at the moment. It's quite a large capacitor. Let's get it going faster. .7 of a volt. Creating electricity from a magnetically levitated flywheel. 0.7 of a volt isn't going to power anything interesting, so I wound 4 more coils and connected them in series, which should multiply the voltage by 4. Then with some assistance from an electric drill, it can generate quite a few more volts. But I don't really see much fun in requiring a drill to spin this thing up. It would be much cooler to have it as a desk toy that I can spin by hand and have it power something at much lower RPM. So to increase the voltage, I rewound all the coils with much thinner wire so I could double the number of coils. Then I soldered together a new full bridge rectifier with slightly smaller diodes and larger capacitors. And now I can get nearly 10 volts when spinning it by hand. So now that the alternator can produce much higher voltage, I think we should try and power some stuff. So I've got a whole bunch of LEDs here, and if we can get these to glow, then maybe we can move on to something with a bit more power, such as these electric motors. So let's hook up the full bridge rectifier with these crocodile clips, and we can connect them to the breadboard. And then I'm going to try these red LEDs because according to this, they're the lowest power consumption, so they should be the easiest to glow. Plug it in like that, and then give it a spin. Can you see that on the camera? It's probably quite dim. That glows at really low RPM on the flywheel. Let's try plugging in some more. There's 2 LEDs, 3 LEDs, 4. They're probably too dim for the camera now, so I'll spin it up to speed a bit more. 5 LEDs, 8 LEDs. Right, let's try 10 LEDs. Easily powering 10 LEDs. I think I need to close the curtains in this room to see them glowing properly on the camera. 10 LEDs glowing from a magnetically levitated flywheel. Right, so I think what we need to do is red lights aren't exactly useful for lighting up a room, so let's try some white LEDs. These require a bit more. Oh wow, that works straight away. I thought these would require faster RPM because they require higher voltage. Increase the RPM. Wow, these are really bright. Let's see how many of these we can do. That's 4, 6, 8, then finally 10. Right, they're looking quite dim at the moment, so let's spin it up. Powers them with ease. Well, I probably need to balance it if I want to get any higher voltage. Let's go further. So this is 11, 13, 15. The flywheel's slowing down, so let's speed it up again. And they all come to life. That's so satisfying. And 20 LEDs. Right, so let's spin it up again. This is creating quite a decent amount of power. I did not expect that to light so many LEDs. So it might actually have a chance of moving some of these electric motors. One interesting thing before we move on to the motors, you may be able to see in the camera they're flickering slightly. And that's because as the alternator spins around, it only creates a pulse of electricity as it passes the coil. And they should pulse perfectly in time with the magnets lining up with the coils. Right, so let's unplug these LEDs and then we'll see if we can power an electric motor. How do I position this camera so you can still see the motor and all the wires, so I'm not faking it? I could be faking all of this. It's spinning. There's something oddly satisfying about a spinning object spinning a motor. I'm just going to take my microphone off so you can hear the motor a bit better. Faster, faster, faster. So now if I stop spinning. Okay, I reckon it's going to struggle with the slightly larger motor. Let's get this going fast. Double-handed spin. I'm going to rest the setup on top of these mats because I don't think I've made the frame quite square so it wobbles. There we go, much better. Nothing. I think the only way to get this one to spin is to possibly charge up the capacitors beforehand and then plug it in. So if we get it spinning, charge up the capacitors. There we go. It's like an electronic gearbox, sort of. You have to check this out. I have the original flywheel alternator setup, and if I move backwards a tiny bit, we have an augmented reality generated version of it. This is done without the need for an Android or iOS app, but instead using a website called Thangs, who are the sponsor of this video. Thangs is the fastest growing 3D community with over 3 million available models for you to search, store and collaborate on. Let's say you need to join two of these aluminium extrusions together. Just a quick search will find you many models to choose from. Then you can download the one you want and print it out. Because why waste time designing your own bracket when someone else has already designed one for you? Or if you have started designing a part and have run out of time to finish it, you can use their geometric search to find models that are similar to yours. You can also use Thangs to create private projects with your friends to share great ideas and collaborate. Being able to view projects in augmented reality without having to download and import them into your CAD software makes it so much easier to know what you're looking at. So go check out Thangs by clicking my link in the description below and start exploring today. Big thanks to Thangs for sponsoring this video, and if you enjoyed this video, it'd be great if you could leave a thumbs up down below. If you're new to my channel and want to see other projects similar to this, then please click subscribe down below. And a massive thank you to all of my supporters over on patreon.com for making these projects possible. I honestly couldn't do these projects without your support, so thanks once again. Thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.
Con bướm xinh, con bướm xinh, con bướm đa tình. Đùa vui với lũ hoa bao hoa mai lan đang hòa mình. Con nén bay, con nén bay, con nén la đà. Tựa bầy tiên nữ trong cung nhà tình cha cha cha. Con bướm xinh, con bướm xinh, con bướm đa tình. Đùa vui với lũ hoa vu vơ đôi khi anh một mình. Con nén bay, con nén bay, con nén la đà. Chờ đợi đâu đó bao năm rồi, nhạc tình cha cha cha. Xuân ngất ngây, xuân có hương hoa. Tìm đâu đến những phút giây xưa khi say mê đậm đà. Tia nắng mai, tia nắng mai, tia nắng chan hòa. Bầy lộc đón cánh bông hoa nở thành cha cha cha. Và giờ đây mùa xuân trở lại, nào cùng nhau tái sinh yêu đời, rộn ràng cha cha cha. Xuân đến đây.
Start today with GoDaddy. If you can dream it, you can build it. Whatever your idea, GoDaddy can help you turn it into something real. Start today with GoDaddy.
I was asked if I could levitate a magnet, and my answer to that was, well, yes, of course I can. All I need is two magnets, one on top of the other, and something to stop them from being pushed apart. So before I start, if I have two magnets, and they both have opposing fields, they're going to repel each other. But as soon as I stop stabilising the magnet will slip to the side and lose its balance from the position that we set it in. So a simple solution to that then is to get a tube, in the case of ring magnets, and put the tube through the magnets. And of course when I put that magnet down on top of the other one, the tube stabilises the magnet, it can't go off to the side, and we get this effect that the magnet looks like it's floating above the other one. Now the follow-on question to that was, can I balance this magnet by itself? And my answer to that is, well, I don't think so, but it would be nice to make a little experiment to see if it was actually achievable. Now before I go any further, I'd like to make a distinction between balancing a magnet, which is what I'm going to try and achieve in this video, and levitating a magnet, which is a whole different subject. For me to balance a magnet without using any tricks, at room temperature I'm going to attempt to use other magnets to try and create the stabilising magnetic force that's needed. Levitation, on the other hand, is a different subject, and it usually involves superconducting materials at sub-zero temperatures, either that or electromagnets, which create a really strong lifting force. So with all that said, this is an experiment to balance a magnet and see if that's achievable. The basic idea then is to use the natural flux of the ring magnet and then use these small magnets to encircle it and hopefully get it into a position that it will remain stable just by opposing the magnetic field. So this will be the first layout then. I'm going to put the smaller magnet around the larger magnet, and then I'm going to try the magnet on top, and I'm going to see what kind of result that I get. Now the first problem I've got is that I want to use all the magnets in the same orientation which are going to push up on the ring magnet. So I'm going to have to drill into the board and get them to sit steady before I go any further. Okay, so this is the basic idea. Then we've got 8 magnets in the centre, and these are either all north facing or all south facing, but whichever way they are, they're all the same direction. They're positioned just on the edge of the magnet, or where the edge of the magnet will be. and I'm hoping that they're just going to provide enough uplift just to suspend the magnet slightly. These are for a stabilising magnet, which I'm going to attach to the ends of these, and hopefully we can get some lateral stabilisation as well. However, I've just noticed that when I put the magnet on, it's actually just move your bugger. Right, when I put when I oh my god, right, stop. When I put the magnet on, it's just over the edge of the larger ring magnet, so I'm going to move these brackets back 10mm, and hopefully that'll give me the distance that I need. So take two then. I've moved all the brackets back. Now it's time to put the magnet in the centre, just to get a control of what's actually happening. So here we go, putting the ring magnets onto the smaller magnets. So it comes as no surprise then that the magnet isn't stable, and it won't stabilise above the smaller magnets. So the smaller magnets are right in the magnetic flux along the outer edge of the ring magnet. You can feel the repulsion, and it just wants to hover, but of course it won't stay there because it's just getting pushed over to the side. Now, interestingly enough, if I push the magnet all the way down, stabilizes, because I've got through the magnetic field and it's now wanting to just bind to the smaller magnets. So it's time to add some of the stabilizing magnets now. This magnet is pushing away from these magnets here, but if I get one of the smaller magnets as a stabilizer, this actually pushes away from this top edge of the magnets as well. On its side, this hopefully should be pushing against this magnet and either clamping it down or just pushing it in enough so that it creates a stabilizing force around the magnet when all the rest of the magnets are applied. Now all the stabilizer magnets are on. I'll put the ring magnet and lower it down onto the smaller ones in the centre. This is what I have then. When I put the magnet in the centre, it's quickly being drawn over to the stabilising magnets. So the flux strength of these magnets is probably a little bit too much, or they're probably a little bit too close to the magnet in the middle. So I'm going to move these brackets back a little bit further and see if I get some more adjustment on these magnets. Another byproduct of these magnets being so close is that it's lifting the magnet or suspending the magnet a lot higher than when I had it just on the lifting magnets by themselves. These brackets have now been moved back, and that gives me a lot more control on these stabilisers. And when I put the magnet in the middle now, it does actually feel like there's a lot more control over the magnet. It's a lot more stable. It's not just suddenly trying to rush over to the other magnets. But that said, it is largely the same effect as what I had before. I thought I'd show you what it would be like if I turned all the poles round on these magnets. So these have all been flipped, and when I put the magnet in the centre now, it really pushes the magnet down to around about 10mm off the base magnets that I put in originally. So I dare say if we had some other kind of stabiliser lower down, that might have a better effect on how this magnet's performing or being balanced in this setup. This then is where I'm going to conclude part one of the experiment. We've got a basic setup and we've got partial suspension of magnets, or maybe even alternative part two, using your ideas and implementing any changes that you might suggest. But that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next video.
Đâu rồi?
Để ông đi gọi.
Cao thủ bất bại là ai vậy trời?
Ý con là cao thủ này.
戦果を上げました。敵巡洋艦を撃沈。